My father leaned over his wine glass and told me I was letting my husband groom our daughter. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the thin ring of red wine clinging to the inside of his glass, the way it wobbled when his hand stopped moving. The television had already gone dark, leaving that faint blue glow in the living room like a cold bruise. Somewhere down the hall, the floor creaked as one of the kids shifted in bed. My husband, Ben, sat across from me on the other end of the couch, one arm slung over the back cushion like he belonged there the way he always had. His face went still in a way I recognized, like a door quietly locking from the inside. No yelling, no flailing, just that sudden tightening around his mouth that told me he'd heard every syllable. My mother's eyes flicked to me and then away, as if she couldn't quite bear to watch my reaction. She reached for her water and took a tiny sip like she was trying to look innocent. It felt unreal that we were even here. 10 minutes earlier, we'd been a normal family on a normal night. A kids' movie playing too loud, popcorn kernels scattered on the rug, our son's socks abandoned in the middle of the floor like landmines. Our 15-year-old Lily half slumped against Ben because she'd been bored and sleepy, and because she's always been that way. Clingy when she's tired, affectionate like a cat that decides you're a safe surface to land on. I had watched her curl into him without thinking twice. Her head on his chest, her hair fanned across his hoodie. Ben's hand resting on her shoulder in that absent-minded way. Parents touch their children when they're trying to keep them from slipping off the couch. It looked so ordinary, I almost didn't see it. And now, my father was saying a word like groom in my living room as if it was a simple observation about the weather. Ben's voice came out calm, but it had a sharp edge under it. "Excuse me?" My father didn't blink. He was a tall man, still broad-shouldered at 70, the kind who carried authority without raising his volume. He set the glass down with careful precision. "I'm saying it's inappropriate. She's 15. She's not a little kid." The air in the room thickened, not with shouting, with the way everyone suddenly became aware of their own hands. My mother's fingers tapping lightly on the coaster, my own palms damp against my knees, Ben's jaw working once, like he was chewing on his anger to keep it from showing. I heard myself say, soft and automatic, "Dad." He lifted his chin toward me. "Don't dad me, Rachel. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm telling you what it looks like." What it looks like. Those words hit harder than the accusation. Because what it looks like means the story has already been written, and we're all just pretending we're discussing it. My mother finally spoke, and the sound of her voice made my stomach twist because she wasn't hesitant. "It's not normal, honey." Ben's eyes snapped to her, not angry at first, more stunned, like he'd misheard. I felt the room tilt. My parents had always liked Ben. They praised him for being involved, for coaching soccer, for showing up to school things, for being the kind of father our friends envied. My dad used to call him one of the good ones, with that smug tone, like he'd personally vetted him. And now they were sitting in our living room after 2 glasses of wine, quietly accusing him of something unspeakable. I tried to breathe in, but the breath caught halfway. For a second, I couldn't find the bottom of it. Ben spoke again, still controlled. "Lily fell asleep, on my chest, during a cartoon. That's what we're doing." My mother's mouth tightened. "You're acting like we're attacking you." My father spread his hands as if this was a reasonable family conversation. "We're not attacking. We're telling you a boundary needs to be set." A boundary. I looked from my father to my mother, searching for the usual warmth, the usual sense that they were safe people to land with when something felt complicated. What I saw instead was a hard kind of certainty, the kind that doesn't care about context, only about suspicion. I heard my own voice come out, thin, more defensive than I meant. "Lily has always been affectionate, you know that." My father's eyes narrowed. Affection is one thing. This is another. Ben's hand flexed on the cushion. He leaned forward slightly like his body wanted to stand even if his voice was staying level. "Say what you mean." My mother's gaze dropped to the coffee table. We don't have to say it any plainer than that. Silence fell. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes you hear the refrigerator hum and the distant rush of water in the pipes. The kind that makes your skin feel too tight. I felt my throat tighten. Part of me wanted to shut it down fast, to smooth it over, to laugh it off like a stupid drunk comment. But another part of me, the part that couldn't ignore the word groom, was frozen with shock. My parents weren't tipsy and silly. They were sober enough to choose that word. My mother had agreed like she'd been waiting. Ben's voice changed then, still quiet, but the restraint in it turned into something colder. So you think I'm a threat to my own daughter? My father didn't hesitate. I think you're crossing a line. Ben stared at him for a beat that felt too long. Then he looked at me. And what hurt wasn't anger. It was disappointment, sharp and clean. You too? He asked. I opened my mouth, but my words got tangled. I didn't want to betray my parents, and I didn't want to betray my husband. I wanted the whole thing to unhappen. I wanted to rewind to Lily falling asleep and the movie still playing and none of us being forced to imagine the ugliest thing. I started. Ben's face hardened. No, don't. Then my father, like he couldn't help himself, added, You should be grateful we're saying it. Any other family would be alarmed. Ben's eyes flashed. He stood so fast the couch cushion sprang back with a soft thump. The sound made me jump. Alarmed? He repeated, voice still low, but his control looked like it was cracking at the edges. In my house, over my kid falling asleep. My mother lifted her chin, offended. Ben, don't get dramatic. That was when he finally snapped. Not with volume, but with the words themselves, sharp enough to cut. You can all fuck off, he said, looking from my father to my mother and then to me. Go fuck yourselves. The words landed like a slap, not because I'd never heard profanity, because I'd never heard it from him aimed at people we considered family. My father's face went rigid, insult rising up like heat. My mother's lips parted in shocked disbelief, as if the real offense was his language, not what they'd just implied. Ben didn't wait for a response. He walked past me, footsteps steady, shoulders tight, not looking back. The hallway light flicked on, spilling a harsh yellow stripe across the carpet. He disappeared into our bedroom and shut the door with a click that sounded louder than a slam. I sat there with my parents, the TV now a black mirror reflecting our shapes back at us. My hands shook slightly and I pressed them together under the blanket to hide it. My mother exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. He needs to apologize, she said, voice trembling with indignation. My father nodded. That was unacceptable. I stared at them, hearing only one thing beneath their outrage. They weren't backing down. They weren't embarrassed. They weren't wondering if they'd gone too far. And then my mother leaned closer to me, lowering her voice like this was a secret she'd been saving. And she said one quiet sentence that made my stomach drop. The quiet sentence my mother whispered didn't need repeating to do its damage. It hung there between us, heavy and sour, like milk left out too long. I felt my chest tighten, my breath shortening in shallow pulls that didn't quite reach my lungs. I stood up because sitting suddenly felt impossible. The blanket slid off my knees and pooled at my feet. My father watched me with that same steady look he'd worn all night, as if this were a test, and I was failing it by reacting at all. I think it's time you go, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded flatter, older. My mother frowned. Rachel, don't do this now. Now is exactly when, I said. My hands were shaking again, visible this time, and I hated that they could see it. You said what you came to say. My father rose slowly, deliberate. We didn't come to fight. I let out a short laugh that surprised even me. No, you came to accuse my husband of something monstrous and expect us to thank you. He stiffened. Watch your tone. There it was, the shift. Not concern anymore, authority. My mother reached for her purse. the leather strap sliding against the arm of the chair with a soft rasp. "You'll understand when you calm down." That sentence landed like a slap. Calm down, as if this were hysteria, not shock. I walked them to the door because it felt better than sitting there with the echo of their words. The porch light cast a hard white glare over my father's face as he stepped outside. My mother lingered, her hand on the doorframe, eyes searching mine. "We love you," she said. "That's why we said something." I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice not to break. The door closed behind them, the latch clicking into place. The house felt instantly larger, emptier. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of their car starting, tires crunching over gravel, fading down the street like nothing important had just happened. When I turned, the hallway was dark except for the sliver of light under our bedroom door. I paused there, hand hovering over the knob, suddenly afraid of what I might find on the other side. Not him, but the space between us. Ben was sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees staring at the floor. The lamp was off. The room was lit only by the dim glow from the bathroom nightlight, casting long shadows that made the corners feel farther away. "They left," I said. He nodded once, not looking up. I waited for him to say something. Anger, reassurance, anything. But he stayed quiet. The silence pressed in, thick and uncomfortable, and it felt worse than shouting. "I didn't agree with them," I said finally. It came out too quickly, like a defense I'd rehearsed. I was just stunned. He lifted his head then. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from that deep, burning restraint. "You didn't shut it down." The words were simple. They cut anyway. "I know," I said, and for a second I thought I might cry, but the tears stayed stuck behind my eyes. I froze. He looked away again, jaw tight. "Your mother used a word she can't take back." I swallowed. "I know." Another silence. This one stretched longer, pulling at the seams of everything we hadn't said yet. Somewhere in the house, the heat kicked on with a low hum, then clicked off again. "I'm sleeping on the couch tonight," he said, standing. The statement wasn't a threat. It was a boundary, and it hurt all the same. "Ben, I need space," he said, already moving past me. I stood alone in the bedroom, staring at the indentation his body had left on the mattress, the fabric slowly smoothing itself out like nothing had ever been there. The next morning arrived without permission. Sunlight crept through the kitchen window, pale and unforgiving, illuminating the mess we'd left behind. I poured coffee and didn't taste it. The kids ate cereal in near silence, the clink of spoons too loud in the room. Lily watched me over the rim of her bowl. "Is Dad mad?" "No," I said too fast. "He's just tired." She nodded, accepting it the way children accept things that don't make sense because they trust the explanation more than their instincts. Ben didn't come into the kitchen. He left early, his mug rinsed and turned upside down in the drying rack like a small, deliberate sign of order. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at it. By noon, my phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "We need to talk." What he said was deeply disrespectful. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Another buzz followed, this time from my father. This can't be ignored. The pressure was subtle, but constant, like a hand pressing against my back, guiding me toward an apology I didn't believe in. Every message carried the same unspoken demand. Fix this by correcting him. A third buzz came, unexpected. My sister, Anna, Mom called me. "What's going on?" My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The house felt too quiet, every tick of the clock amplified. I typed carefully. They accused Ben of something awful. There was a long pause before her reply. "What?" That single word cracked something open. Not relief, just the knowledge that I wasn't completely alone in my confusion. The afternoon dragged. I folded laundry that didn't need folding, my hands moving on autopilot. The smell of detergent felt cloying. My mother's voice replayed in my head, that quiet sentence, over and over, like a bruise you can't stop pressing. When Ben came home, he went straight to the shower. I heard the water start, a barrier of sound between us. I leaned against the counter, palms flat, breathing slowly until the tightness eased just enough to function. At dinner, the kids talked about school, about a quiz, about a funny video. Ben nodded at the right moments, but he didn't look at me. I felt like I was watching my family through glass. After the kids went to their rooms, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. My father. "Rachel," his voice said, calm and measured. "Your husband's reaction was inappropriate. We are concerned about Lily's well-being, and frankly, so should you be. Think about what this looks like to others." I sat on the edge of the couch, the fabric rough under my fingertips. What it looks like. Again. Another message followed, this one from my mother, softer but sharper in its own way. "We're just trying to protect our granddaughter. I don't understand why you're choosing him over family. Choosing him. As if this were a sides game. As if my marriage were a betrayal." Ben emerged from the hallway, hair damp, shirt wrinkled. He saw my face and stopped. "What now?" I handed him the phone without a word. He listened, his expression hardening with each sentence. When it ended, he set the phone down carefully, like it might explode if he wasn't gentle. "They're doubling down," he said. "Yes." He looked at me then, really looked, searching for something. "Are you?" The question wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed again, this time a text from my mother that made my stomach drop. "If you won't handle this, we will. For Lily's sake." I didn't sleep much that night. When I finally did drift off, it was shallow and restless, the kind where memories slip in, uninvited, and refuse to leave. I grew up learning early how to make myself small. My parents never called it that, of course. They called it being practical, sensible, not asking for too much. My father worked long hours, his hands always smelling faintly of metal and oil when he came home. My mother kept careful lists, groceries, bills, birthdays, lined up in neat columns in a spiral-bound ledger she kept tucked into her purse. Money was discussed in murmurs, not arguments. Fear lived quietly in our house, wrapped in politeness. I learned the weight of $1 before I learned algebra, learned how to tell the difference between wants and needs by the way my mother paused before buying something, fingers hovering, calculating. There was an envelope system back then, each marked in her tidy handwriting: rent, utilities, food, school. I can still see the ink, slightly smudged from years of handling. When I was 16, I took my first job at a grocery store, bagging cans and bread under fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. My paycheck was small, but the first time I handed my mother cash and watched her tuck it into the envelope marked food, something settled in me. Contribution meant safety. Sacrifice meant love. That belief followed me everywhere. I met Ben in my late 20s, after a long stretch of doing everything alone. He was kind in a way that didn't announce itself. He listened without interrupting. When he laughed, it wasn't loud, but it was honest. He worked with his hands too, though in a different way, fixing things, building things, steady and patient. When we married, I folded my careful habits into our life together, still tracking numbers in my head even when we didn't have to. The early years were lean anyway. We rented a small place with drafty windows. In winter, the cold crept in around the frames, and we learned to wear sweaters indoors. I kept a notebook then, not for groceries, but for hours. Overtime shifts, side jobs, every extra dollar scribbled down in the margins. That notebook lived in my bag, pages dog-eared, ink faded where my thumb rubbed it again and again. When Lily was born, everything shifted. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, relentless one. Babies don't care about budgets. They care about warmth, about being held, about the sound of a familiar heartbeat. Lily cried if you set her down. She slept better pressed against someone, her tiny body fitting into the curve of a chest like she'd been designed for it. Ben learned her rhythms faster than I did. He could calm her with a gentle sway, humming tunelessly while pacing the floor at 3 a.m. I watched him once, exhausted and aching, as he leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, Lily tucked against him, both of them breathing in sync. It struck me then how natural it looked, how unremarkable, how right. That never changed. As Lily grew, affection stayed her language. She hugged hard. She leaned in. She reached for hands in crowds. When she scraped her knee, she wanted arms, not words. When she was scared, she wanted closeness, not explanations. Ben never pulled away from that, neither did I. Our house filled up over the years. 2 more kids, more noise, more mess, more responsibility. I went back to work full-time when the youngest started school, carrying that old notebook habit into spreadsheets and budgets. I tracked expenses in my head while cooking dinner, while folding laundry, while lying awake at night listening to the house settle. My parents watched all of this from a distance that felt supportive at first. They praised us for being hands-on, for being present, for doing things differently than they had. My mother once told me she admired how comfortable Ben was with the kids. I held on to that compliment longer than I should have. The ledger from my childhood never left me, metaphorically speaking. I still thought in columns, what we gave, what we owed, what we saved. Family was an investment. Care was a currency. You showed up, you sacrificed, and in return you were trusted. The first time I felt that trust wobble, it was subtle enough to ignore. A look held a second too long, a comment phrased as concern, my mother asking casually if Lily was too old to sit on laps. I brushed it off, a laugh, a change of subject. Old habits die hard. Make it smooth, keep the peace. Even as Lily grew into her teenage body, all elbows and attitude and heavy sighs, she still reached for comfort when she was tired. She still curled in close during movies she didn't care about. She still rested her head on Ben's chest without thinking twice. I never questioned it. Why would I? Nothing about it felt secretive. Nothing about it felt wrong. The notebook in my bag changed over the years. The pages became digital, the numbers larger, the margins cleaner. But the instinct remained to account for everything, to justify everything, to believe that if you did enough right, no one would doubt your intentions. That night in the living room shattered that illusion. Looking back, I can see how the past fed into the present, how my parents' quiet fear of scarcity turned into a different kind of fear as they aged, how the world's ugliness crept into their thinking without announcing itself, how suspicion can masquerade as protection if you squint hard enough. At the time, all I felt was loss. Loss of safety, loss of certainty, loss of the idea that love, demonstrated consistently and openly, would be enough. The next morning, I found the old notebook by accident while cleaning out a drawer. It had migrated there somehow, pages yellowed, cover bent. I flipped it open, fingers brushing over numbers written decades ago, rent amounts that seemed impossibly small now, grocery totals circled in pen, notes in the margins reminding myself to pick up extra shifts. I sat on the floor, notebook in my lap, and felt the weight of years settle over me. All the ways I'd learned to equate sacrifice with worth, all the ways I'd trusted that pattern to protect us. From the hallway, I heard Lily laughing with her brother, the sound light and unguarded. It cut through me, sharp and sweet at the same time. I closed the notebook and slid it back into the drawer like I was hiding something fragile. My phone buzzed again on the counter. I didn't look at it right away. I already knew who it would be. Later that afternoon, when I finally did check, there was a new message from my mother, longer this time, careful and composed. She'd always been good with words when she wanted to be. She wrote about responsibility, about appearances, about how people talk. She wrote about her fears, framed as wisdom earned through age. She ended with a line that made my stomach sink. "We're only saying this because we love Lily." I stared at that sentence until it blurred, my reflection faintly visible on the screen. Love, apparently, had conditions I hadn't known about. I set the phone down and went to find Ben. He was in the garage, sorting through a box of tools, movements methodical, controlled. The light in there was harsh, unflattering, casting deep shadows across his face. He didn't look up when I entered. I remember when Lily wouldn't sleep unless she was touching one of us, I said quietly. He paused, a wrench held mid-air. Yeah. I used to think that meant she felt safe. He set the wrench down slowly. It did. I believed him. I still do. But belief felt thin now, stretched over a crack that was widening whether I wanted it to or not. As I stood there, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal, the weight of old ledgers and new accusations pressed in on me, I realized, with a sudden clarity that made my chest ache, that the life I'd built on careful accounting was about to be audited by people who no longer trusted the math, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go. The shift didn't announce itself. There was no single blow, no dramatic confrontation that marked the beginning. It arrived the way damp creeps into walls, slow, quiet, destructive if left alone long enough. It started with silence. My parents stopped calling Ben directly. Messages came only to me now, carefully worded, stripped of warmth. Invitations that used to include both of us suddenly addressed only me and the kids. Family group chats went quiet whenever Ben's name came up, then resumed as if nothing had happened. At first I told myself it was temporary, hurt feelings, pride licking its wounds. I'd grown up watching adults smooth things over with time. I expected that same slow return. It didn't come. Instead, the pressure turned inward. My mother began asking questions that weren't really questions. "Has Lily been more withdrawn lately?" she asked one afternoon when she stopped by to drop off muffins. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, watching my reaction more than listening to my answer. "She's 15, I said. "That's kind of the job description." My mother nodded, but she didn't smile. Of course, teenagers. Then, after a pause that stretched just a beat too long, she added, "Especially girls." The muffins sat untouched on the counter, cooling. The kitchen light above us was too bright, making everything feel exposed. I wiped my hands on a dish towel that didn't need wiping. A few days later, my father called while Ben was at work. He didn't ask how I was. He launched straight into logistics. "We've decided Lily should spend more weekends with us," he said. "It would be good for her." My grip tightened on the phone. "She already sees you regularly." "Yes," he said, voice calm, reasonable. "But this is different." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. "What do you mean, different?" I asked. Silence. Not a dropped call, a deliberate pause, long enough for my stomach to knot. "Rachel," he said finally, "you know what I mean." I felt heat rise up my neck. "No, I don't." Another silence. He exhaled softly, like I was being difficult. "We're just trying to be proactive." After that call, I stood in the laundry room staring at the humming washer, the circular window blurring colors into nothing recognizable. My reflection warped in the glass. I didn't look like myself. Ben noticed the change before I admitted it to myself. He started coming home quieter. He stopped initiating conversations with my parents altogether. When my phone buzzed, his shoulders tensed even before he knew who it was. One evening, while the kids were doing homework, my mother texted again. "Has Lily started developing yet?" Sometimes girls get confused when their bodies change. The words felt invasive in a way I couldn't immediately name. I read them twice, then a third time, my breath shallow. I didn't respond. At dinner that night, Lily laughed at something her brother said and leaned against Ben's arm without thinking. It was brief, casual. Ben froze for half a second, then gently shifted away, his smile tightening. Lily noticed, her brow furrowed. "What?" "Nothing," he said quickly. Too quickly. The rest of the meal passed in an awkward quiet. I felt something crack open in my chest as I watched my daughter pull back, confusion flickering across her face. That was the first real break. Not loud, not visible to anyone else, but irreversible. Later, in the bedroom, Ben sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees again, that posture becoming too familiar. "I don't want her thinking she did something wrong," he said quietly. "I know," I said, "but if I keep pulling away—" He stopped. His hands clenched together, knuckles pale. "They've already planted something." I had no answer. The ceiling fan clicked faintly as it spun, an irregular sound that refused to settle into rhythm. A week later, my mother crossed another line. She showed up unannounced while Ben was out picking up groceries. Lily was in her room, door half closed, music playing softly. My mother sat at the kitchen table, folding her hands carefully. "I want to talk to Lily," she said. "About what?" "Girl things." "No," I said. The word came out sharper than I intended. Her eyes flashed. "I'm her grandmother." "I'm her mother," I said. My heart pounded loud in my ears. She held my gaze for a long moment, then smiled, a small, tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. "You're being very defensive lately." That sentence lingered in the air long after she left. The humiliations multiplied in quiet ways. At a family birthday party, my father made a comment to a distant relative about how some people these days don't understand boundaries, glancing briefly at Ben before turning away. No one said anything. No one defended us. Ben stood there holding a paper plate, his face unreadable. In the car afterward, he didn't speak. The streetlights flickered across his face, light and shadow alternating too fast to read his expression. Another time, my mother suggested, loudly in front of my sister, that perhaps Ben should step back from school pickup duties. "Just to avoid misunderstandings," she said, as if discussing parking etiquette. I laughed it off in the moment. Later, alone in the bathroom, I locked the door and pressed my forehead against the mirror, breathing slowly until the shaking stopped. The house itself began to feel different, cold in places it hadn't before. The couch where Lily used to curl up felt like a minefield. Ben sat stiffly now, hands always visible, movements careful, controlled. He stopped hugging her goodnight unless she initiated it, and even then, the embrace was brief, awkward. Lily grew quieter. She retreated into her room more often, door closed, music louder. One evening she asked me, "Did I do something bad?" "No," I said immediately. "Of course not." She studied my face. Teenagers are better at reading cracks than adults like to admit. "Then why does Dad act weird around me now?" I opened my mouth, closed it. My throat burned. "He's just tired," I said again, hating myself for the lie. The lowest point came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was folding laundry when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Harris?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "This is Karen from the school counseling office." My knees weakened. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, socks spilling from the basket onto the floor. "We've received a concern," she continued, tone professional, neutral. Nothing formal at this point, just something we wanted to discuss. The room seemed to tilt. "A concern about what?" There was a pause. Not long. Enough. "About Lily," she said, "and family boundaries." I don't remember ending the call. I remember sitting there afterward, hands numb, staring at the pile of socks like they belonged to someone else. When Ben came home, I told him. The color drained from his face. "They went to the school," he said. I nodded. My voice wouldn't work. He sat down slowly, like his legs might give out if he moved too fast. For the first time since all this began, his composure cracked. Not in anger, in exhaustion. "I can't live like this," he said quietly. "I feel like I'm being watched in my own house." Something inside me collapsed then, not loudly, just a soft inward fall. All the careful balancing, all the appeasing, all the silence. It had led us here anyway. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The overhead light buzzed faintly, too harsh, casting shadows that made the room feel smaller. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around a mug I hadn't touched. For a moment, a dangerous, fleeting moment, I thought about giving in, about apologizing, about setting rules I didn't believe in just to make it stop. The thought made my chest tighten until breathing hurt. From down the hall, I heard Lily cough in her sleep. A small sound, ordinary, human. I closed my eyes, tears finally spilling over, silent and hot. I let them fall onto the table, soaking into the wood like a stain that wouldn't come out. When I wiped my face and looked up again, one truth stood clear and terrifying. They weren't going to stop. The moment didn't come with fireworks. It came folded into an envelope. Plain, white. The school's logo stamped neatly in the corner like it belonged to a bake sale notice or a reminder about picture day. I almost tossed it onto the counter with the rest of the mail, already reaching for the kettle, already planning dinner in my head. But something made me stop. The paper inside was heavier than it needed to be, thicker, formal. I sat down at the kitchen table before I opened it, the chair scraping softly against the tile. The overhead light hummed, casting that same unforgiving brightness I'd begun to associate with judgment. I unfolded the letter once. Then again, it was a request, a meeting. Carefully worded, neutral. No accusations on paper, but enough implication threaded between the lines to make my stomach clench. Concern had been raised. They wanted to ensure Lily's well-being. They wanted to hear from us. My hands shook so hard the paper rustled loudly in the quiet kitchen. I pressed it flat against the table with my palm, as if that might steady both it and me. Ben came in while I was still staring at it. He stopped when he saw my face. "What is it?" he asked. I slid the letter across to him. He read it slowly. Too slowly. I watched his shoulders drop by degrees, like something heavy was being lowered onto them, inch by inch. When he finished, he didn't say anything right away. He folded the paper carefully, then unfolded it again, like he didn't trust that it would still say the same thing if he looked twice. "They actually did it," he said finally. "Yes." A silence stretched between us. Not the frozen kind this time, the kind where something is deciding whether to break or harden. "I can't go into that office like this," he said, "like I'm already guilty." "You won't," I said. The words came out before I'd fully formed the thought, but once spoken, they settled into place with unexpected weight. He looked at me, really looked. "What does that mean?" he asked. I picked up the letter again. The paper felt thinner now, flimsier. "It means I'm done letting other people frame our life for us." The sentence surprised me with how steady it sounded. That afternoon, I called the school back. My voice didn't shake. I asked questions, clarifying ones, dates. Who would be present? What exactly had been reported? The counselor's tone shifted subtly when she realized I wasn't confused or apologetic. She explained what she could, carefully, professionally. There had been a call, anonymous, framed as concern. No specific incident cited beyond inappropriate physical closeness. I thanked her, hung up. Sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand. Then I called my sister. Anna answered on the second ring. "Hey, I need you to listen," I said. I told her everything. Not just the big moments, the comments, the pauses, the way our parents' concern had sharpened into something else, the call to the school, the letter. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "They went too far," she said. I exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and grief. "I think they believe they're right," I said. "That doesn't make them harmless," she replied. That evening, I did something I'd avoided for weeks. I talked to Lily. Not in the vague, soothing way I'd been using, not with half-truths and reassurances. I sat with her on the edge of her bed, the lamp casting a soft circle of light that felt like a small pocket of safety. "There are some adults," I said carefully, "who don't understand closeness very well." She frowned. "Like hugging?" like assuming the worst instead of asking questions. Her jaw tightened. Is this about Dad? Yes. She went still, then angry. The shift was fast, startling. That's stupid. I almost smiled. Almost. It is, I said, and it's not your fault, not even a little. She stared at her hands for a long moment. Did I make him uncomfortable? No, I said firmly. Other people did. She nodded once, then leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder with a familiarity that felt like reclaiming something. I wrapped my arm around her without hesitation. Down the hall, I heard Ben moving, the quiet creak of the floorboards marking his steps. I held Lily a moment longer than usual, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, grounding myself in something real. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Ben and I sat at the table again. The letter lay between us. My old instincts screamed to negotiate, to soften, to appease. I ignored them. I don't want to apologize anymore, I said. He nodded. I don't either. I don't want to explain ourselves to people who've already decided who you are, I continued. But I do want to protect our kids, all of them. His eyes softened at that. So what do we do? I thought of the ledger from my childhood, the careful columns, the belief that if you balance things just right, you'd be safe. I pushed the letter aside. We prepare, I said. The words settled between us, solid and deliberate. My phone buzzed on the table, sharp and sudden. A message from my mother, longer than usual. I didn't open it. Instead, I reached for a pen and a legal pad, pulling it toward me. The paper was clean, blank, waiting. As I uncapped the pen, a single thought cut through the noise, clear and unwavering. If they wanted to make this official, then so would I. Preparation didn't feel brave. It felt methodical, quiet, almost dull in its repetition. And yet, every small step carried a weight that pressed against my ribs like a held breath. I started with dates, not opinions, not emotions. Dates. I pulled out the calendar app on my phone and scrolled back weeks, then months. I marked the night of the movie. The next morning's text messages. The first time my father suggested Lily spend more time with them. The day my mother asked that question about development. The birthday party. The call from the school. Each entry felt like pinning something down before it could slip away and rewrite itself. Ben watched me from the other side of the table, silent. He didn't hover. He didn't interrupt. He just stayed present, his hands folded, posture straight, like he was bracing himself for whatever came next. I opened a folder on my laptop and labeled it with our last name. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Inside it, I saved screenshots, messages from my mother, voicemails transcribed, dates highlighted where language shifted from concern to implication. I listened again to my father's voicemail, the one where he said what it looked like. Hearing it with distance stripped away any doubt I'd allowed myself to cling to. There was no warmth in it, no curiosity, only judgment dressed up as reason. I saved it. Then I called the school counselor back. I asked her to walk me through protocol. I asked what constituted a formal complaint. I asked what documentation they kept. I asked how parents were notified and by whom. Her voice remained professional, but I heard something change when she realized I wasn't floundering. She explained that nothing had been substantiated, that no one had spoken to Lily yet, that this was, at this point, a preliminary inquiry. Good, I said. I want it to stay that way. She paused. May I ask, do you have reason to believe the report was made maliciously? Yes, I said. The word didn't wobble. I followed that call with another, to a family attorney recommended by a colleague, not because I wanted a fight, because I wanted clarity. The attorney didn't react when I explained. She asked measured questions: who lived in the home, who had access to the children, who had made the allegation, if known. When I said my parents, there was a brief silence on the line. Not surprise, recognition. She advised documentation, boundaries, Written communication only. Do not argue facts with people who aren't seeking facts, she said. Arguing gives them more material. After I hung up, I sat very still for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. The sound was grounding. Ben broke the silence. You're really doing this? Yes. He nodded once. Thank you. That night, I drafted an email to my parents. It took me an hour to write 3 short paragraphs. I stated that all communication regarding the children would now go through me. I stated that any further attempts to involve third parties would be documented. I stated that we would attend the school meeting together and address concerns directly. I didn't accuse. I didn't defend. I didn't apologize. I read it 3 times before sending it. My finger hovered over the button, old instincts flaring. Smooth it over, soften the tone, add reassurance. I didn't. When I pressed send, my hand trembled anyway. Anna came by the next day. She didn't bring food or platitudes. She brought her laptop and sat beside me at the table like we were working on a project together. Walk me through it, she said. I did. Dates, messages, shifts in language. She frowned at the screen. They're escalating because you didn't fold. I think they believe escalation proves concern. She snorted softly. It proves control. Her presence steadied me, not because she took over, because she witnessed. That evening, Lily came into the kitchen while I was typing. She hovered near the doorway, uncertain. Are we in trouble? She asked. I turned the chair toward her. No. Her eyes searched mine. Are Grandma and Grandpa mad? They're confused, I said carefully, and they made choices they shouldn't have. She absorbed that. Teenagers always do, filing it away somewhere deep. Dad okay? I glanced toward the living room where Ben was reading, glasses perched on his nose. He's hurting, I said, but he's okay. She nodded, then surprised me by saying, if anyone asks me stuff, I know what to say. My chest tightened. You shouldn't have to. I know, she said, but I can. I thanked her, then immediately reminded myself that preparation didn't mean burdening a child with adult battles. Still, the quiet strength in her voice stayed with me. Over the next few days, I reduced contact further. I stopped answering calls. I replied to texts with short, neutral responses. When my mother tried to provoke emotion, "We're heartbroken, you think we'd hurt you," I didn't engage. I saved it instead. Ben gathered his own records, school emails showing his involvement, coaches' messages thanking him for help, photos from events where he was one parent among many, context, volume, normalcy. We didn't share these things with each other as proof. We shared them like armor. The house grew quieter, not tense, focused. The night before the school meeting, I laid everything out on the table. The folder, the timeline, notes from the attorney. I felt calm in a way I hadn't in weeks. Ben reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was steady. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I know you're on my side. I always was, I said. I just had to stop trying to be on everyone else's too. My phone buzzed then, a new email from my mother. I didn't open it right away. When I finally did, my breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition. She wasn't backing down. She was bringing someone else in. The conference room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and overbrewed coffee. Cold fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening everything beneath them. Faces, voices, intentions. A long table sat in the center, too polished, too impersonal, like it was designed to erase warmth on contact. Ben and I arrived early, not out of eagerness, out of refusal to be late to something that already felt stacked against us. He sat to my right, shoulders squared, hands folded neatly on the table, calm on the surface. I could feel the tension in him without touching. It radiated quietly like heat trapped under skin. The counselor entered first, followed by the vice principal. Polite smiles, professional nods. Clipboards held like shields. Then the door opened again. My mother walked in as if she belonged there. My father followed close behind her, and behind them, an unfamiliar woman in a blazer, carrying a leather portfolio, eyes already scanning the room. My stomach dropped. Introductions were made, names exchanged, titles clarified. The woman with the portfolio introduced herself as a family advocate. The phrase sounded harmless, almost kind. I kept my face neutral. My mother sat directly across from me, smoothing her skirt, lips pressed together in something that might have been resolve. My father took the chair beside her, posture rigid, gaze fixed on Ben with that same unreadable steadiness. The counselor cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming. The purpose of this meeting is to address a concern that was brought to our attention regarding student welfare." Concern? Again? She turned to Ben and me. "Before we begin, I want to be clear. This is not an accusation. It's an opportunity for clarification." I nodded once. "We appreciate that." The advocate leaned forward slightly, pen poised. "Perhaps it would be helpful to start with what prompted the concern." My mother inhaled, slowly, deliberately. "I love my granddaughter," she said. Her voice wavered just enough to sound sincere. "And because I love her, I couldn't stay silent." Ben's jaw tightened. I placed my hand flat on the table, grounding myself in the cool surface. "She's at an age where boundaries matter," my mother continued, "and some behaviors, while maybe innocent, can be confusing." Confusing. I watched the vice principal's pen pause mid-note. My father spoke next. "We noticed physical closeness that felt inappropriate for her age." Ben opened his mouth. I touched his arm, a subtle pressure, not to silence him, to steady him. I leaned forward instead. "Before this continues," I said, my voice even, "I want to clarify something. You've brought an advocate today. Is that correct?" The woman nodded. "Yes, I'm here to support the family's concerns." "Whose family?" I asked. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "The grandparents." I nodded again. "Then I'd like to clarify that Ben and I were not informed you would be present." The counselor glanced at the vice principal. That wasn't disclosed to us either. The room shifted, subtle, but real. "I don't object to her being here," I continued, "but I want it noted that this was not a neutral addition." The advocate's pen hesitated. The counselor adjusted in her seat. Noted. I turned back to my parents. "Now, you've said you observed something you found concerning. Can you describe, specifically, what you saw?" My mother's eyes flicked briefly to my father, then back to me. "She fell asleep on her father's chest during a movie." "That's it?" I asked. Silence. "That is the behavior you felt warranted contacting the school?" I pressed. My father cleared his throat. "It's not just that. It's the pattern." "What pattern?" I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. The advocate jumped in. "Patterns of overfamiliarity can—" "I'm sorry," I said, turning to her. "I wasn't asking you." The counselor's eyebrows lifted slightly. My mother's lips tightened. "She's 15. "Yes," I said. "She is, and she has been affectionate her entire life, which you have praised, repeatedly, until recently." "That's not fair," my mother snapped, the mask slipping for half a second. "Then let's talk about fairness," I said. I opened the folder in front of me. Slowly. Deliberately. I didn't rush. I let the sound of paper fill the space. "These are records," I said. "Dates, messages, voicemails, statements." I slid a page across the table, not to the counselor, to the vice principal. "This voicemail," I continued, "was left by my father 3 days after the movie night." I pressed play on my phone. His voice filled the room, calm, controlled, familiar. Think about what this looks like to others. The words landed differently here, stripped of context, exposed under fluorescent light. I stopped the recording. "That phrase appears again," I said, sliding another document forward, "in a text from my mother, and again in an email sent the morning before the school was contacted. The counselor leaned in, reading. My mother's face drained of color. "You didn't come to us with questions," I said, my voice steady. "You didn't ask Lily how she felt. You didn't ask Ben for context. You decided, and then you escalated." My father stiffened. "We were trying to protect her." "From what?" Ben asked quietly. The question hung in the air. No one answered. The vice principal cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harris, may I ask, did Lily ever express discomfort to you?" "No," my mother said quickly. "Did you ever ask her?" Silence. I leaned back slightly, letting it stretch. The counselor turned to me. "Mrs. Harris, you mentioned documentation. Can you explain the timeline from your perspective?" I nodded. This was the moment. Not explosive, precise. I walked them through it. The movie night, the confrontation, the language used, the withdrawal, the suggestions, the call to the school. I didn't editorialize. I didn't embellish. I let the facts speak. When I finished, the room felt heavier. The advocate spoke again, tone sharper now. "Even if intentions were innocent, perception matters. Schools have a duty to act on evidence," I said, "not implication." The counselor nodded slowly. "That's correct." My mother looked at me then, truly looked, something like panic flashing across her face. "Rachel, this isn't how it was supposed to go." That sentence froze the room. The vice principal looked up. "What did you mean by that?" My mother opened her mouth, closed it. I didn't step in. I didn't soften it. My father spoke instead. "We just wanted someone to intervene." "Intervene how?" the counselor asked. He hesitated. "To set boundaries." "With whose authority?" I asked. No answer. The silence stretched, thick, suffocating. Finally, the counselor closed her folder. "Based on what we've heard today, there is no cause for further action." Ben exhaled sharply beside me, a sound he hadn't realized he was holding. She continued, "However, I am concerned about the impact this process may have had on Lily." My mother flinched. "We will not be speaking with her," the counselor said firmly, "and we will be documenting that this report was unsubstantiated." The advocate shifted in her seat. "I'd like that noted as well." "It will be," the vice principal said coolly. I felt something loosen in my chest, not relief, power, quiet, controlled. I gathered my papers. Before we stood, I looked directly at my parents. "You accused my husband without evidence," I said. "You involved institutions without consent, and you did it under the guise of love." My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father stared straight ahead. "We are setting boundaries now," I continued. "No unsupervised contact. All communication in writing. Any further action like this will be met legally." The word landed hard. Ben stood beside me, taller now, steadier. As we walked out, the door closing softly behind us, I didn't look back. In the hallway, sunlight streamed through a high window, dust motes floating lazily in the air. I stopped for a moment, hand pressed flat against the wall, breathing deeply. Behind us, muffled through the door, my mother's voice broke. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the suffocating kind of quiet we'd lived in for weeks. Sunlight spilled through the windshield in wide, steady bands, warming the dashboard, catching dust in the air and turning it into something almost gentle. Ben kept both hands on the wheel, posture relaxed for the first time in a long while. Neither of us spoke right away. We didn't need to. The building receded in the rearview mirror, brick and glass shrinking until it became just another shape swallowed by distance. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. White siding. The small crack near the front step Ben had meant to fix for years. Nothing outward had changed, and yet stepping inside felt different. Lighter, like the walls had exhaled. Lily was in the living room, sprawled on the floor with her brother, arguing over a board game. She looked up when she heard the door. "Hey," she said, searching our faces. "It's done," I said simply. She studied me for a beat longer, then nodded, as if she'd been holding something tense inside herself, and finally let it go. She went back to the game, laughter returning in cautious bursts, testing the air. Ben stood there watching her, eyes soft, shoulders no longer hunched as if expecting accusation to fall from the ceiling. He caught my gaze and gave a small nod. Gratitude, trust. Something reknit, the boundaries held. My parents didn't disappear overnight. They sent messages, apologies wrapped in explanations, explanations wrapped in hurt. I read them. I didn't engage beyond what was necessary. Everything stayed in writing. Everything stayed measured. They asked to see the kids. We said no, not yet. They pushed. We didn't bend. The power shift was quiet but absolute. A few weeks later, the school sent a brief follow-up email confirming the matter was closed. No further action, no lingering notes, just closure, clean and official. I archived it without ceremony. Life resumed its ordinary rhythms. Homework, dinner. Ben fixing the loose step out front one Saturday morning, the sound of his hammer steady and sure. Lily started sitting closer again during movies, not curling fully in like before, but resting her feet against him, her shoulder brushing his arm. Natural, unforced. One evening, while clearing out a drawer in the study, I found the old notebook again, the one from years ago, the ledger of survival, yellowed pages filled with careful numbers and cramped handwriting, rent amounts, grocery totals, little reminders to myself written in the margins, proof of how hard I'd worked to keep everything balanced. I sat down with it in my lap, flipping through slowly. For years, that notebook had meant safety through sacrifice, worth measured by what I gave up, how much I endured quietly. Now, holding it, I felt something different. I hadn't failed at keeping the peace. I'd outgrown the idea that peace meant silence. I closed the notebook and didn't put it back in the drawer. I placed it on the shelf instead, spine facing outward, not hidden, a record, not a rule book. That night, Ben and I sat on the porch, the air cool, the sky deepening into dusk. The cicadas buzzed, steady and loud, unapologetic. He reached for my hand, thumb brushing the side of my palm. "I don't feel watched anymore," he said. I nodded. Me neither. We sat there until the porch light flicked on automatically, bathing us in a soft amber glow, warm, protective. Later, after the house had gone quiet, I stood alone in the study once more, looking at the shelf, at the notebook, at the life we'd built beyond it. If my story stayed with you, maybe it's because you recognize that ledger too, the one you've carried, keeping track of what you owe, what you sacrifice to be loved. For a long time, mine taught me how to survive. Now it reminds me that survival isn't the same as safety, and silence isn't the same as peace. If you've ever had to set a boundary that cost you something, you don't have to carry that weight alone. Sometimes being seen is the first line you finally get to write for yourself.